A very good morning, wherever you are catching this broadcast from. We're really glad that you chose KBC channel on this early morning as we begin yet another day of our live broadcasting of a very historic moment for our country. We are still mourning the death of the country's second president, Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. During this season, what we have been doing is to celebrate some of his greatest achievements and also draw lessons from his leadership and the life that he lived for 95 years. He's known as Kenya's longest serving president, having ruled for 24 years. And Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi also was the oldest surviving president of our country. He pioneered the decolonization of this particular country, and he was among the people that played a pivotal role in Africa during the times when we were still under the colonial rule. Among the early Africans who got a chance to be exposed to education at a youthful age and got a chance to also get into politics and write a different chapter concerning the history of our nation and our continent. We are celebrating Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi as we prepare to lay him to rest tomorrow, the 12th of February 2020. All roads will be leading to Nakuru County at his Kabarak home. This is where his remains will be interred. But what has been happening first is an observation of a season of mourning. Today we are in the 8th day of the national mourning season since it was declared by President Uhuru Kenyatta. And it is also a day when all roads will be leading to Nyayo Stadium, as today there is going to be a memorial service that will bring together Kenyans from all walks of life and also religious leaders from different denominations as they're going to be leading the nation in a service that will, put another step in this journey of laying Mzee to rest. And today we'll be taking you to Nyayo Stadium. We have our team on the ground that is following up on what is happening. Yesterday, preparations were at a climax. We saw President Uhuru Kenyatta driving himself personally to the venue that was over the weekend just to follow up on the progress made to just make sure that everything was on course. So far, according to the government spokesperson, 7 heads of state have confirmed that they will be attending this particular memorial service, among other heads of government that will be coming. And we are yet to get a clear information about who is coming to the country and who will be part of this particular memorial service. But it's a public forum that is open for all Kenyans from all walks of life, and we have also been involved in quite a number of activities. We remember there was 3 days that were set aside just for Kenyans to have a chance to view the body of the late Mzee Moi, which has been lying in state at Parliament buildings for 3 days, beginning Saturday, Sunday, and yesterday, Monday. It was supposed to come to a conclusion. The exercise was supposed to come to a conclusion by around 5 p.m. but courtesy of the numbers that turned up, it was extended by 1 hour, so ended up coming to a conclusion at 6 p.m. Today, we understand there is not going to be a chance for the viewing of the body, but still, Kenyans are going to have an opportunity to be part of the service. So will you be going? You're supposed to be there by 8 a.m. Everyone is supposed to be seated. President Uhuru Kenyatta is expected to be there around 10 a.m. And we are just watching and waiting to see what will be happening at Nyayo Stadium. We will be giving you live pictures from there. And traffic is going to be affected in several roads in Nairobi, and of course the Nairobi-Eldoret Highway, which is leading to Nakuru. Starting today afternoon all the way till tomorrow, we will be letting you know more details about how that is going to pan out, so that you are not caught up in the traffic situation. But with me in studio, we will be talking also about Mzee Moi, but today we are taking that conversation forward just to look at some of the lessons that we can borrow from not just his leadership style, but from where we are coming as a country and where are we going in terms of the kind of leadership that we want. Remember, all the issues we are facing in the society and every solution we want concerning our problems depend on the people that we have given the mandate to represent our interest as the common wananchi. Are we empowered enough to know which kind of people, what crop of leadership are we looking for? And even as we celebrate Mzee Moi, what is it that was his strongest point in terms of leadership, and what can we maintain what is it that we can move forward so that we have a leadership that is fully representative of our interests. That will form part of our conversation this morning. A very good morning. My name is Serfine Achieng, and in studio this morning, I'm hosting a panel that cuts across from way back to now. And this is something that really excites me because we'll be getting an opportunity to tap into them that served during Moi's time, and also them that have really a strong belief in terms of the kind of leadership that we want. And this is why I want you to be part of this conversation. Allow me to introduce my guest for the show, and then I will also tell you how you can be part of this conversation as well. Sitting from my far left, the lady looking all nice in that shade of green, her name is Mildred Ngesa. She's a veteran journalist, a communication expert, but above all, she's a transformational leadership coach. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And of course, we have Abiud Wasike. And Abiud had a very great opportunity to serve under Mzee Moi during his time as a PS in several ministries, which he will be telling us about, and how it was, you know, working under this man that many are celebrating today. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, early morning. I must insist.
Thank you very much.
So let's begin straight away, and let me allow our viewer also to be part of this conversation at KBC Channel 1. That is our official social media platform at Serfine_Achieng. That's my Twitter handle. On Facebook, find me at Serfine Achieng. Share your thoughts with us even as we continue with this conversation. So let me begin this conversation straight away. I always like to start here. We are celebrating, and some are saying we are mourning, a man who many have eulogized as a statesman, a patriot, somebody who was so passionate about his country. I want to get a cocktail of both your beliefs and what you remember Moi for, and your message to the nation this morning, even as we enter the 8th day of mourning him. Let me start with you, Mildred. When you got the news that Mzee was no more, what is it that came into your mind?
Well, maybe I want to start by saying we are celebrating, we are lamenting, we are mourning. Mm-hmm. It's all a mixture of emotions, like we have seen in the past few weeks. In the past week, and we must not forget that it's also a time when we are reflecting. It actually calls for a much deeper reflection than what maybe we were prepared for. Mm-hmm. We are mourning because a great leader has passed, or a perceived statesman has passed. Mm-hmm. We are lamenting because we have listened to quite a bit of lamentations about what was that didn't go right, or what should have been done differently. We're also reflecting because then we have to ask ourselves what the passing of the former president really means to us as a country, what the passing ought to mean to us in terms of leadership, and what it is that we feel needs to be focused on for us to move forward as a country, as a nation. They say that when a great man passes at the age that our former president has passed, there is no choice but to celebrate, and rightfully so, because that is quite an age where somebody has, like they say in Kiswahili, amekula chumvi nyingi, which is totally in order. But what we need not to lose focus on is the reflection that ought to come from a 24-year presidency that was significant in this country, but in what sense? So it gives us an opportunity to unpack and deeply reflect. To celebrate, as you say, that is fine. To those mourning, as you say, we say pole. To those lamenting, have to be listened to. Because these are critical processes that happened in our country that we have to bring out to the fore and have a discussion on. It's a great day for us as a nation, because either way we look at it, we have to reflect on leadership. Yeah,
which is a good thing. I like the aspect that this gives us an opportunity to sort of like move forward and look at what is it that is good about Moi's leadership that we can borrow. What is it that we can learn as lessons from the challenges that were faced during his time. And you were the former PS in several ministries, not just one ministry. Had an opportunity to have a very close interaction with Mzee Moi. What kind of a man would you describe him to be?
First, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here.
Most welcome.
And I was wondering how I would express my feelings until I received the message that I will be here this morning. The loss of President Moi is something we can celebrate, and at the same time, something we regret, because he was a moving library, and a library in administration, in handling human feelings. He was a very strong president who believed in this country, who believed in his people, and who believed in peace, and who believed in love. Although many may call him that he was a tyrant or he was what, but to the best of my knowledge and my experience with him, he was neither of those. He really took the Christian principles and put them into practice. There are other areas where I would say people mistook him, but he understood people. And in his early part of leadership, he had a lot of international problems, because the international community did not like his approach when he was saying that let us think Kenyan, buy Kenyan, and live as Kenyans. And he had a lot of fights from outside. But I will give you more examples in areas where he has been misunderstood.
All right. And I'll be interested to find out more about how he was misunderstood during his time. And Mildred, yesterday I was hosting a panel just talking about the legacy of Mzee Moi and some of his greatest achievements. And I remember one of the questions that came to the fore as we were having that conversation was the fact that Moi made decisions that he made considering the era and the time that he ruled in. And I would like to get also your reaction to, or your opinion on what you think. If you compare the time in which Moi and Mzee Jomo Kenyatta ruled and the time that former President Mwai Kibaki and Uhuru Kenyatta ruled, were the circumstances, are the circumstances different? Like Moi had to do what he had to do considering the circumstances then.
I smile when you ask about Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. I think I was 3 when he passed on. So as a child, I was 3. But I would like to say that at the onset, when we heard of Mzee Moi's passing, when I was reflecting personally, I said that as a child, Moi was my hero. He was my hero because I drank free milk. He was my hero because we sang and danced at the City Stadium and at the National Stadium for all this national ceremony. He was my hero because I think to many of us at the time, we kind of nurtured our sense of patriotism from how he put together his political leadership. But that is me as a child. As an adult, reflecting deeper, looking keenly into the facets of good leadership and democracy, and assessing situations of repression and freedom of expression, and understanding the need to open up spaces for civil society and for media to operate, and to understand civil liberties, then my hero worship dims. And it dims because Mzee is clear that Moi did quite a lot in holding the nation together, and that is true. That his patriotism was at the top of his focus, that is true. But the question that we need to ask is whether in the process of the 24 years, that the anomalies, the errors within the era, whether it tainted a perceived legacy. And so one of the things we have been debating the entire week is that should a legacy be contested for it to be a legacy, as is. And there's no answer of right or wrong. What I know for sure is that Kibaki presidency and the current Uhuru presidency gives us all as Kenyans an opportunity to compare and contrast, which is not the best way to look at it. But also, in my view, to weigh the kind of liberty space, civic space that we have, the kind of democracy we purport to propagate as an African country, to weigh where we are at as a people in terms of strengthening unity and nationhood, to weigh whether patriotism has dipped or has strengthened we as a people since the Moi legacy and since the Kibaki presidency and since the Uhuru presidency. I feel that it is a bit, it is not quite fair to compare per se because it's a bit not very leveled. But the truth of the matter is that either way, as heads of state leading a nation, the nation has to sit and assess and say, under the leadership of so-and-so, we were passing this path, but there was quite a lot of hue and cry. Under the leadership of so-and-so, we stretched the boundaries a bit, and because of that, we became more, entrenched as a people and felt more secure, more at home, more at liberty in our own country, under the leadership of so-and-so. So for me, I think what the question would be is if we miss the opportunity to ask and reflect on the kind of leadership we want as a country going forward. We shouldn't miss that opportunity at all.
Hold that thought over there, because that is exactly what will form, the basis of this conversation. But I want us to go back a bit, Abiud. You tell us a bit about the genesis of your interaction with Mzee Moi, how you first had, the very first experiences with Mzee Moi. But you see at the Nyayo Stadium, it's already packed, and as early as 4 a.m. Some Kenyans say they were there as early as 4 a.m. Others traveled from as far as Nandi County just to be here for this historic memorial service. What does this tell you, Mildred?
And that is absolutely wonderful. That's why I said this opportunity should not be missed. When you have Kenyans waking up at 3, at 4, or traveling from other places to be at this spot, all of them at this time for this event, for me, the leaders who will take the podium, and beginning with our current president, should seize the moment and actually infuse that which is spoken greatly about the former retired president. And what is spoken greatly about him are issues about nationalism, about patriotism, about unity. So if at this moment, looking as it is, that the stadium is almost full and the event is 2 hours away, that we don't seize the moment to speak nationalism, to speak patriotism at this time when we know our country is dogged by so much politically that is divisive.
We should take advantage.
That this is the advantage that should be taken, that if the stage has been set, and if we don't grab that opportunity, we lose the moment.
All right.
Yeah.
Abiud, seeing Kenyans turning up in their numbers, like what you're seeing at Nyayo Stadium, and having known this man that we're celebrating today, what does it, tell you? What message do you read from today, and what is it that you tell Kenyans that as we have this memorial service, let's observe these issues?
Thank you very much. We have to be very open that Moi is an example of leadership which is not based on academic. People have taken academic achievement as a way of leadership. That when you are a professor, you will be better than a man who has never been a professor. And Moi here has touched the hearts of people. And he has done wonders for people. He went to every village. He let the professionals do their work. And he let the politicians do their work. And you can see the effect. The effect is that people felt his leadership because he was not everything. And to give a little example is that Moi preferred to consult. We had more professional commissions for every decision that was made that was going to affect the Kenyans. Moi had to seek the views of the Kenyans. And he did it. Before he introduced the 844, he set up a commission of professionals, the academicians. There were 17 professors on that, and there were only 4 permanent secretaries who were members of that commission. And they are the ones who prescribed the 844.
The McKay Commission.
The McKay Commission, which happened that I was the secretary.
All right. I'm really curious. This is for me and for other Kenyans. What was your first interaction with Mzee Moi, and you know, what did you think about him during that time?
You know, basically I was a teacher, and when Moi took over as a vice president in 1966, I think, he came to Kangaroo to visit Embu, and he addressed us. You see, we who were at that time teaching, we thought that a person who speaks very good English is the best teacher, is the best leader. And here Mzee came, and his English was not as we thought it should be. Little did I know that he was going to lead this country to great heights.
Okay, so that was the very first time.
That was the first time we interacted, though we never talked. We never talked. But as time went on, when I moved to the ministry headquarters as inspector of schools, we were more, although not directly with me, but with through my bosses. He was very much keen on education for the Kenyans. And even when he introduced milk, he was sympathizing with those children who could not manage to go for lunch. Yes, and he wanted every child to go to school and be healthy. And he was very much determined on education. He was very much determined and concerned. And there are very many things which, for example, when I was the PS in Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, that is when he talked to me, and he said, and with my minister, the late Jeremiah Nyaga, who was my minister, he called us and said, you know, I have flown over the Kenyan forests. When you go by road, as you are doing, you think the forests are intact, but when you fly over, they are being finished.
You see the destruction.
People are working on it. People are destroying the trees. I want everybody to be moved out of the forest because we can easily have desert in Kenya. And that was a very big concern for the Kenyans. And so we took the action of trying to remove the loggers from the forests, those who had settled there illegally, and so forth. But people mistook him because there were specific communities which were in the forest. And they thought that he hated them. And I think some of us who were carrying out the orders and making sure that Kenya is not turned into a desert, we were also mistaken. That we didn't like the communities which were in the forest.
Like what is happening with the Mau
Yes, and I'm
eviction
thinking
right
because
now.
Mzee is bringing up such important and interesting things.
It's taking us back.
Yes, and I like that you talk about, you flag off academics and speaking good English as not the certificate to good leadership.
Correct.
And I totally agree with that. That as the presumption that we might have is that a good leader is very highly schooled. And so what Mzee is saying is, I think Moi had these other attributes that were extremely important in terms of leadership. But I'm curious also to understand, when she mentions the Mao, or the approaches that our successive regimes have taken to correct things, like even to correct desertification, You've mentioned moving in to save our forests, and I've remembered the Momonyoko wa Udongo exercises that were done by Kata Moja Panda Mbili. And we all planted trees and building the gabions. I mean, we had twice a week to go down wherever and plant trees. We planted lots of trees from whichever school. I'm also curious to know whether, compared then and now, Mzee feels that successive regimes have been a bit lax, that there's been laxity, because Moi was quite iron-fisted in implementing, and sometimes to the extent that there was uproar against the approach. And Mzee, you can acknowledge that. But do you feel that the approaches have been lax? There's a bit of laxity. That's why I think that
compared to what, you know, Moi, a good example you've given in the education sector, but you've also taken us to his environmentalist side. He was so passionate about conservation of the environment. He even earned an award, the UNEP award, with regards to, you know, his efforts in conserving the environment. But then, what I think Mildred want us to explore is whether all those initiatives that Moi laid as foundation, we maintained them, or did we miss the point? Did we let go of the good foundation that Mzee laid? If you compare then and what is happening now over time.
I would be very careful not to compare, because I'm not
and this is where we started. It seems like we're going back there.
Yes, I'm very careful not to compare, because I'm not even understanding who is who in our professional or in administrative leadership. You don't hear of the Director of Education. You don't hear of the Chief Inspector of Schools. You don't hear the Director. You hear of Cabinet Secretaries and other people. So I cannot compare, because Moi had led us to be understood. If you are Director of Education, you are known as Director of Education.
That is one thing that stood out about Moi. Even his administrators, the PCs, the DCs, the chiefs, the village elders, they were well known.
Substantive. That it was clear and there was a path. But you know, the thing I'm thinking now, as you put it, Mzee Wasike, is when we are looking at good leadership, you want that a good leader does not create more followers. A good leader creates more good leaders. And if all these wonderful projects that we had then were not sustained, then I worry. I wonder, did the legacy that is Mzee Moi create more good leaders or just followers? And it's not only about his leadership, it's about all the leaders that we have. That when you're a good leader, you create other good leaders. You don't create more followers. Because if you create more followers, they won't lead. They won't emulate what you're doing. You need to create more leaders who are doing even better than what you did. So if we have a gap, then I worry. I ask myself that if those processes worked then, but now we have a huge gap because they're not working as well. Did we succeed
did we
in
miss
good
the
leadership?
point?
Did we miss the point?
Abiud, how was Moi's strategy in terms of interacting with the people that he has given the responsibility to man the different sectors, including yourself? How was he going about it to ensure that, in as much as he may not be there physically, that work was progressing, that his initiatives were a success? How would you describe that?
Moi was very good in monitoring things. You may think if you are doing something, you may think that he doesn't know when he had the people on the ground. Even the messengers could be his informers. And also, he liked what we would call the system to be followed. For example, as a permanent secretary, I needed to have my own meetings with my heads of departments, and the heads of departments to have their own meetings also. And once we have decided on issues or policies, we would brief the minister, and the minister would brief the cabinet. And then if Moi takes it over, he would announce it. For example, I used to tell my heads of departments that don't lie to me so that the minister goes to lie to the president, and the president lies to the nation. You see, because whatever you say down here
will be
ultimately.
Yes, and the president will stand up to say, my government is doing this, and yet he is lying. You see, and it is you who has caused it. But as far as Moi was concerned, he had eyes. For example, I founded a small school in Bungoma. It was called Kamsinga SCK, Girls High School. And we wanted to change the name to his name. And in a public place, I asked him, as the chairman of the board, after reading the speeches and so forth, to change the name, whether we can call the school Moi High School. When he replied, he stood up and he said, my name cannot be associated with silly things.
So that means he had known the background.
If I accept that school bears my name, you must make sure that it succeeds nationally.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will not accept.
So he knew the school well.
No, he wanted it to. You can't have my name if it's not proper and succeeding.
It's not going to succeed. If he accepts it, it is not going to succeed.
Yeah.
And yet the school was only 3 acres, and we wanted to use his name so that it can raise funds for us, and we expand it.
But you see, he knew what you were doing.
You see?
Exactly. So he knew before.
Yes, and he accepted.
Many say that Moi would ask you something that he already knows, just to confirm whether what he knows is what you're going to tell him.
Yeah.
He accepted. And why did he accept? He was going to visit French school, Kamsinga, which is a very highly known school.
Yeah.
But since we were working very hard to attract him, the security had briefed him. So he only visited Moi Kamsinga.
Yeah.
And it became Moi.
Yeah, and it is still Moi Kamsinga?
Yes, it is the only school Moi gave in that county a bus.
Yeah.
And the school moved from 3 acres to 35 acres.
Yeah.
Slowly by slowly.
So
and it is now a national school, and more or less it is extra county, and it is even going to represent Africa in handball in Japan.
Yeah. But there's a lot to say about then his authoritative approach to leadership.
was he firm? Was he a disciplinarian?
Extremely.
How do you describe him in terms of, rubber stamping that he's the one?
No, he was very firm. And in fact, if you lie to Moi, you know very well at the end you will suffer. You see, because I remember when I was in the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, there was an assistant minister. On every Friday, he would ask for a vehicle. Because government vehicles are not released. He would ask for a vehicle, and the excuse was that I would like to go to State House, Kabarak, or whatever. The 4th time I told him, Wasiri, ukizoea kwenda huko watakufungia mlango. Because you are going to tell him a lot of lies which he will know you are lying. Do you know? It came to pass. The 5th safari, he was not allowed in. And he was dropped. Because he was going to gossip. But Moi has ears. He knows the truth. So Moi was very good in his machinery. You could not do things without... He gave you authority and power, but he will make sure that he follows it up.
All right. I want to probe you on something, Mildred, that you mentioned that really quite stood out for me, the difference between followers and having leaders.
Yeah.
How do we, if you assess what we have, how do we get to that space where we can have people who can be independent and really represent the interest of Wananchi in the various capacities that they have been given the mandate to, without having that hawk eye on their head? Like Moi has to say, the president has to be around, the CS has to be around for me to do what I'm supposed to do. How do we get to that space?
And what I try to come into terms with is how to connect authoritarianism and my inspiration from a leader,
Yeah.
so that I'm able to deliver. I'm listening to Mzee, and I'm wondering about if he consulted quite a lot with his team and listened to what they say. But then there is that other aspect of authoritarianism, my word is law. Then where do you bridge the gap? But then, you know, it worked. It worked then, as per what we have been told. But what I would really like to push is that, in my view, a good leader is one who connects with the hearts and minds of their people. And connecting with hearts and minds of the people goes beyond just knowing what problem the people have and what needs to be solved. So then a good leader has to inspire a sense of inspiration in you, has to inspire you to follow leadership and do yours even better than what the good leader is doing. So I have reflected over Moi's legacy and wondered whether there was enough mentorship or grooming for other leaders to follow in his footsteps. In 2003, we didn't see quite a bit of that. We thought we had, but we didn't see quite a bit of that. And so it brings to question that even the crop of leadership that we have now, if they were indeed mentored and groomed by Moi, is this the trickle effects of what we see from the great statesman that he was? And for me, then the lesson, in essence, is what kind of a leader are you? What legacy do you want to leave? What do you want to impact? And truly, truly, I still maintain that a good leader creates more leaders, not more followers. Because you can stand alone and have 1 million followers. But in their 1 million followers, there is no succession strategy of anybody who can sustain your leadership legacy. If you pass on, then there's a huge gap, which means then the leadership that you had was not about the people, it was about you.
But there's so many...
It was about, let me finish, it was about you, and that's worrying. And that, I think, is what we see in many of our African countries, African states where gaps are there. That the leadership is huge, it's humongous, it's revered. Then this person exits the scene. And there's such a huge gap that you wonder about what happened. We were doing so well. So for me, as a transformational leadership facilitator and coach, we say that if your leadership leaves a gap, as opposed to filling it with even more vibrant, progressive, transformative leadership, it means that the leadership that you had was about you, not about them. And leadership shouldn't be about you. It should be about those that you lead, so that they're able to be inspired to take up leadership with you. These are the kind of reflections we are having, and really interesting to hear Mzee Wasike bring it, because then it brings into me questions about leadership.
And I like where this conversation is going. You interacted with Moi, and the question that you know is coming to the fore is whether he was consultative. Was he deliberate in terms of raising you in that space that he mandated you to have responsibility on?
Moi was not authoritarian. He was very consultative. That's why he set up so many commissions, which I don't even see as it was at that time. They call him an authoritarian simply because if he went in a public place and he heard the plight of the people, he may direct. That's why they say he's authoritarian. He may direct that hii barabara ifungwe au hii itengenezwe au watu hao wapate hii. That is where people mistake him. But otherwise,
he made decisions on the spot.
On the spot. These roadside decisions he was making, those were calculated decisions with the people. On the spot, because it is, if he knew that the thing would not be very, would not need a lot of resources, would not need a lot of bureaucracy, he would direct. Okay? But otherwise, in consultation, Moi was very good. Because I remember when I was in health, he would call and say, I understand there are no medicine in hospitals, these hospitals, and so forth. And then he say, brief me on this. You see, before he makes pronouncement.
Did he listen to your opinions?
Yes, he did. There is only one. I still remember the retired President Kibaki, when he came from the cabinet, he says, you know, the president has declared that there should be cost sharing in the hospitals, but we have not prepared a paper on that. Now let us see, how shall we implement it? You know?
So you started working on that. All that thought, Abiud, I'm coming back to you. President Uhuru Kenyatta, this is what he described Moi to be, Kenya's foremost iconic leader. He said that Moi is a great son of Kenya and a father of the nation who was a true champion of Pan-Africanism. He played a huge role in his entry, that is the entry of Uhuru Kenyatta into politics. And Uhuru described Mzee Moi as a leader who mentored many into responsible leadership. That is what he said as soon as he jetted into the country Saturday. I don't know if you were to look at the man that Moi was, and earlier before we went to that link, you said that there was something that he wanted done and it pushed your team to actually have a sit down, and you were trying to come up with a document?
Which one?
When you were in the Ministry of Health?
Yes, this is when he made a decision that there should be cost sharing in hospitals. Yes. So we had to come up with a policy paper now of how it should be done, because there are communities which could not afford, and therefore you didn't want them to die. But remember, one thing is that Moi did a lot for Kenyans. But people didn't see the dreams of Moi because they were being distracted by even foreigners. You see, for example, the milk was disconnected. Disconnected because, one, those who opposed Moi began saying that the milk was being laced with the family planning drugs. You see? And they politicized it. That is how it stopped. And yet, the people who are saying so, the director of KICC was the chairman, was from their community. So was he lacing it to control his community or what? But it was their community which was complaining. And then you can see 1998, Moi set up a commission which was called Harmonization of Terms and Conditions of the Public Service, chaired by Kip Clay. It happens that I was one of the commissioners. It is the one which the retired President Kibaki applied. You see, because it is the one which recommended the retirement of 60 years, the establishment of Salary Review Commission, the performance contracts, and so forth, almost all those things, and they were applied. You see, the government that followed without Moi applied the same. But nowadays, we don't see this kind of reports being implemented and having been discussed in details. I'm not criticizing the present government, but I'm saying that things change as they say, but we don't know whether they are changing for the better or for worse.
Where do you think we are? Is this the best that Kenyans deserve? Is this the Kenya that we want? Let me use that.
No, I'll come back to the Kenya that we want briefly. But you know, if you it's not a doubt that Moi streamlined the public service. That it was tightened up, it was streamlined, it was to a fault quite disciplined, and they delivered then. My question is, if you have entrenched a tradition, it ought to outlive you, not the other way around. So then it pokes questions in terms of what was really entrenched for people to follow. Because then it has to outlive successive regimes. If you have entrenched a tradition that is firm. But we appreciate what was there then. The thought about the free milk, for me, leadership by compassion is a good thing, because you're thinking, gosh, these children are going to miss school because they don't have a meal. Let me put in this. And there was a budget allocated for that. Am I right, Wasike? There was a budget allocated.
Yes.
So there's a possibility that any successive regime can allocate a budget to feed school children in this country through and through, which doesn't happen. Okay, I think we have school feeding projects.
Currently we have school feeding project in several public schools.
In several public schools. And
almost all public schools, actually.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, but you know, what I really want to see is a sustainability of transformative leadership.
But
That it doesn't come as a one-off. And that it still goes back to my point of grooming and mentorship, Serfine. Because if, as a good leader, because a good leader is futuristic, is looking at the future, is seeing where Kenya is going 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now when I have exited the scene. But what groundwork are you preparing so that whoever comes to take up from you carries this mantle in a way that is equally progressive? That things don't collapse when you exit.
But now, who should really instill that? Because we all agree he planted the seed. He was there when he came up with all these initiatives. He groomed most of the politicians we see today, President Uhuru Kenyatta being among them. If you've been hearing what a majority of the political leaders have been saying when they're sharing the messages of, condolences, most of them say they wouldn't be where they are today if not for Moi. Moi did what he could do. What else was there?
So in a home sometimes, when the father is a disciplinarian, the children will know that the first thing I do when I wake up, I have to make my bed. If I don't make my bed, long after the father has gone 20 years ago, this man wakes up in the morning and makes his bed. Because it was instilled in him that as a person in this house, you must make your bed. And so there are no two ways about it. He can travel the world, he can gallivant the globe, he can have whatever education he has. He knows that the first thing he has to do when he wakes up is to make his bed. It's the same perception that we see, because once you're in a position of leadership, you are held at a much higher echelon. You're not down here where you lead. You are held much higher. So the expectations are higher. So then it means that as you lead, what kind of deliberate, purposeful planning for the future do you have? If you're mentoring and grooming, who are you mentoring and grooming, and for what and how? You see, these are the questions. We look at our leaders now, and I'm not sure I can talk mentorship and grooming. All I can see is amassing individual, I think, acclamation for you as a person when you're at this seat at this time. And that is worrying for a country that is actually struggling to move forward. There has to be a purposeful continuation of your leadership that has been instilled and entrenched. We knew as children then that you get to school and let's take a simple example like children in a bus, that there was no argument. You knew that as a child, if you're seated and an elder comes in, you stand up immediately. So that's instilled in you. It becomes a way of life. Now, the leadership of integrity that we should be instilling into our processes should not even be debatable. That our leaders should know that integrity is a no debatable kind of thing.
It is
it's
something
either
that
this
should
or
be there.
not. So if he was truly, and as we say, our retired former president was a man of integrity, was a man of authority, was a man of dignity. But
he was a timekeeper.
He was a timekeeper. He was an astute nationalist. But now, what happens when he exits the scene and everything looks like we are not sure where we are standing? What happened? Who was there? How do we... For me, it worries me that there's no continuity of this kind of leadership we hear being celebrated.
Abiud, who do you think...
Before, let me comment on that one. You see, in terms of grooming or planning, the retired and now the resting president did his best. And that is why the president who followed him had very successful leadership. Okay? Because as I told you about the Kipulei Commission, it established the independence of parliament, the independence of judiciary, and the independence of the Public Service Commission. Those three. And they are still there. And the things have been moving on well. But as I told you that once you begin mixing up leadership with academic achievement, then you have a problem. Because leadership is not based on academic achievement. Okay? I say this and I'm repeating it, because when you have somebody who is going to lead the people in a certain place, and you say, okay, let him be a professor. And yet there is somebody down there who has grown up with it and who understands the system. But you are not using him, you see? And when his voice is not heard, so in the process, he says, you do your business. He just sits down, you know? For example, now if you walk around Kenya, you may not see an agricultural assistant in the field. You know, you know who used to go around advising farmers. You will not see them. Why?
So something happened.
Something has happened. Somebody says, do your work. And he just sits. Because if the legacy of Moi has to be followed, and again you have to know that Moi left the government how many years ago?
From 2002. That is about 18 years ago.
Yes. So he has been around while he was seeing his policies being changed. You see, for example, let me tell you, I have seen in education where they say every child must go to secondary school. Okay? Whether you have you did this or you did that, you must go to secondary school. And that is somebody thinking it is a new idea. But I remember 1976, I was one of Her Majesty's inspectors who Kenya guests in England to see how they were organizing this continuous people going from one class to another and even being kept in the school until you reach 18 years. And we toured there, and we saw people who were in Form 4 and could not read and write because they were just moving, yes. And
from one level to the other,
yes.
but they're not really getting the quality of being in that
who
stage.
Who could not read and write. And then the people who were going to universities were of the well-to-do people who were taking their children to private schools.
Who had the money?
Yes. And it was a very hot debate. It was a certificate of secondary education. And when we made a recommendation to Moi didn't accept it. You see? So, but now it is being implemented. Until we will see people in Form 4 who cannot read and who cannot write because he is just moving.
They're illiterate at Form 4 level.
There is nothing to tell him read. Whether you read or not, what does it matter? You see, if I'm coming to Nairobi like I did yesterday, I'm coming by road or I'm coming on foot, and we still we are being treated equally, what does it matter? So you work hard for what?
There is a lot of hopelessness.
God bless us.
And this is what we should be doing.
Exactly.
Reflecting on that kind of quality of leadership. When you ask what the kind of Kenya we want, we see leadership that's not inspirational right now. And I speak for myself and about others who might feel the same way. We see impunity, quite widespread. That's why it's so hard and unrelenting when you're fighting corruption, for example. We see mismanagement. We see total disregard for the rule of law. And that is worrying and it is concerning. But I feel that most importantly for the younger generation or for the generations that are looking up, when there is lack of inspiration from the leaders who are leading you, it doesn't matter at what level, then that's a case to worry because you have entire generations coming up with nothing to look up to. And this is why this entire Moi discourse is important. And we were for the opinion that the entire week, even institutions of learning should have been talking about the Moi leadership, unpacking it, understanding it, analyzing it, you know, to go beyond just the media platforms, but everywhere, the lectures and everything. But you know, we are a very vibrant country. We've gone through phases that have been very challenging, and yet we keep standing. And that's a good thing about this country. We are very vibrant. And so most of the time, I see the hopelessness, but I still see there is a bit of hope. I see hopelessness a lot, because when you look around and there's long, huge queues of people who are jobless, there are people who are frustrated, standards of living are high, people are not able to make it. You see and sense the hopelessness. What I refuse to give up on is when you see the younger people attempting to engage in discussions about leadership, about governance. Sometimes they are erratic. Most of the time, well, they are erratic. But you can see an interest coming up. Where they are let down is when the elders fail to guide properly as they should, and leave it to them and say, this is beyond us, you know. I think that if we have great leaders, if we have leaders who have been there ahead of us in this country, Wasike and everything, they owe it to these generations to tell the story as they ought to tell it. They owe it to write, for prosperity, to write books, to record themselves, to do articles,
like I'm saying,
to give
sharing
lectures.
quite some
Yes, like right now, we owe it to
many
our
Kenyans may not
generations
know
to
about
understand
what used
it.
to happen back then.
Absolutely, we need to do it and not give up. I totally agree, because leadership is not about how many degrees you have. No, it's not academic. That comes as a bonus, as an added advantage.
All right.
But yeah.
Abiud, what is it about the leadership of Moi that stood out for you? If you had to mention just even 3 or 5 qualities of the leader that he was, that we can borrow as lessons today, considering that you worked under his era.
One, I admire his patience. He was very patient. And he could be humiliated, but he will not react. I remember one parliament when some opposition leaders refused to swear allegiance to the president, and Moi did not do anything. I remember he suffered, but patience, because I learned a lot. You know, he had a lot of vision for Kenyans. For example, when he started the Nyayo bus service, it was a very good idea. He wanted to help Kenyans who are within the city to move from one place to another, and whereby maybe the government could control the fare. And I was shocked when I went to World Bank in New York. I was by then the PS local government, and we were looking for funds for urban development. And the first thing, the Mzungu whom I was going to meet with my team from the Treasury and so forth, said, "Bwana PS, what is this thing you call Nyayo bus service?" And he really belittled the whole thing and called us names. And here we are coming there officially. So they fought very hard to make sure that the Nyayo bus service collapsed. But that Mzungu was also silenced, because I asked him, "Sir, why are you asking about Nyayo bus service?" He says, "Why is the government getting involved?" And I said, "Sir, you come from Britain. Is the public service vehicles in these double-decker buses in London, are they not government owned?" He looked at me. I said, "You use different names, but they are owned by the government and directed by the government." So I said the same in Washington and so forth. So Moi was very patient, because in the international communities, there was a time when even in America, the name of Moi could not be seen in any newspaper. And yet Moi never reacted negatively. You see, he never banned Americans. So I learned the patience of Moi. But also I learned that if something has to be done, you must put your foot down. And that is what Moi used to do.
You take charge.
You take charge. And you must accept. And I also learned that you should never listen to one version of the story. Always get the second or a third. And Moi used to listen to that. because you could not go there and say, this madam is useless. He will listen to you and keep quiet, but he will seek another opinion until there are 3 or 4 before he makes the decision. Or else he will transfer you from this seat to another seat if he doesn't agree with the person in charge.
So you have to be, you say the lesson you draw is patience. More you took charge. I've quite got something that you have to be inspirational. You have to be a leader who inspires, people who you're serving. I want to know more about these qualities, because we want to really improve the crop of leadership that we having today. As in honor of Mzee Moi, as we move on as a nation, what is that character or principle that will guide a leader into the right direction in terms of the qualities and the principles that he instills in himself, apart from being inspirational, patient, and taking charge?
You know, I look at it this way, Serfine, a way, so that we move our minds from thinking that leadership is only political. Because it's not only political. Leadership can be taking charge of the station where you work. That unless you question your motives for leadership, then you won't know how to discharge impactful leadership. Once you question your motive, then you will understand how to discharge your leadership. Unfortunately, although we say it tongue-in-cheek and we joke, we always assume that the leadership that we are aspiring for is the leadership to earn more zeros in your payslip, so that your bank account becomes bigger. But unknown to us, that great leaders across the world are the leaders who transformed, impact changed, leaders who inspired. And that's why they're invoked from time to time. They went many years back, but they are still invoked. And so for me, great leadership, unless you deliberately question your motives for leadership and you get it clear. Because if your motive is making money, and making money is fine, because people have to make money, they have to eat, but if your motive is primarily making money, then you will not inspire. What you will inspire is more young people, for example, wanting to be rich, drive big cars, live in big houses, but not transform or change anything or impact. So we have to aspire to have leadership that is instilled in a set of values. And there is no Bible that says these are the values that you can follow on leadership, although all of us subscribe to different faiths. But we do know what is called on upon us to define integrity and dignity as a leader. How then do we infuse that in the leadership that we carry forth? And we really have to ask. I think it is problematic when, as a leader, those you lead are full of, there is accolades, but there is also complaints about gaps. And we don't expect you to be an angel, yes. But we expect, to some degree, that a few stand up and say, these are the shoes that I want to try to fill. Because I have learned this and this and that, I want to live this way and even make it better. That is what I'm desperate for.
I want us to take this conversation a notch higher, and it had started already. We were looking at some of the qualities and principles of a good leader before we went to the links we've had for our viewers this morning. And I want us to talk about the shortcomings, not in the interest of looking at individuals in this era and in the past regimes, but just generally looking at the leadership and the way we understand it and the way it has been inculcated in us, Mildred. Where do you think we miss the point? What is that one thing or two things that we think we are holding dear because this is what we believe leadership is, but that is actually what is leading to our downfall? What are the things that really are killing the crop of leadership that we ought to have as a country?
You know, sometimes when you unpack African leadership across the continent, you're told that a pragmatic African leader has to be a benevolent dictator. So a dictator to a fault for the good of their people. But what we do not interrogate or unpack is what the impact of this perceived benevolent dictatorship is on successive generations. As in, was it worth it at the end of the day to have those kind of intrigues within your leadership? What I see lacking is the passion to actually transform for the better. Because if We have our forefathers and foremothers who fought for the independence of this country selflessly at a time when you and I didn't know whether we would be born or not. But who knew that we have a common enemy to kick out of the country so that we can liberate our people? And they did it selflessly. Their blood was shed for this country, for this continent, so that we may be liberated. That kind of selflessness is what we see lacking today in our leadership. And it is sad that instead of selflessness, we're seeing quite a bit of selfishness. And how do we see it? When we gauge the instances of bad governance, instances of corruption or misappropriation, then you realize that self-centeredness propels the leaders that we have. And therefore, because of self-centeredness and selfishness, then it means it trickles down to the impact down in society. Where are the leaders of this continent who put the best interest of their people forward without gaining anything for themselves? We know that there have been leaders in this continent who died without a penny to their name, and yet they galvanized entire countries towards liberation, towards growth, towards development, towards emancipation, because they truly believed that their people ought to be free. What is it that they had then that we don't have now? It is true when we say that we don't have a common enemy to fight like the colonialists who we had during the pre-colonial time. But now the common enemy we see is the common enemy of greed, gluttony, corruption that is finishing the fabric that we have. We see the common enemy of the North or Western interference into our sovereignty as a nation. We see the common enemy in how countries are doing trade and bilateral agreements that is not for the benefit of the people. Why is it difficult for us to see that kind of clarity in terms of what we should collectively fight against? What I don't see in our leadership, to end it, is the fact that we do not have the humanness that devoted our pre-colonial leaders to fight for a common cause, Utu. The leadership that has Utu, that has humanness, that say, I don't know where you come from there, I don't know where I come, but we are all Kenyans, and for the good of this country that is Kenya, that is our country, let us do this for the good of our country. Let us not embezzle. Let us not, because you embezzle, people die because they can't get access to health care. You embezzle, children are thrown out of school because there's no education. You embezzle, people die on the roads because there is a sense of selflessness that we have lost or we don't have as leaders.
And we need to go to that same spot. And right now what is happening in the country are conversations and efforts towards coming together and shaking hands and putting the past behind, and peace and nation building.
And building bridges. and we reflect on and ask ourselves when you bring that up, Serfine, is that if it is a beautiful thing, a good thing, why am I so much at pains to market a good thing? Then we have to reflect as leaders who are marketing this good thing, where we went wrong. Why is it difficult for these people who we want to build bridges for to believe us? I am bringing you a piece of cake to eat. I need the piece of cake. I'm looking at the cake and doubting it. And thinking, I'm not sure that's very good for me. I don't think you mean well. Why? So we have to question the genesis of where the doubts started. Yes, and so I don't know whether we are a country that's ready to look that deeper. We ought to, because otherwise we will be camouflaging. We camouflage, we put a bandage, and then at some point it bursts. I think it's important that even as a people, individually and collectively, we need to have open, deliberate discussions as to where really the doubts started forming. That even when we are presented with a thing that supposedly looks good, that is perceived as something that ought to build, we are doubtful. And so we have to understand why we are doubtful. We can't throw it under the carpet. And that is deliberately what good leaders ought to do, that they need to pause and say, wait a minute, we can't be running here and the people we are leading, we've left, they're doubtful, they don't think this is good for them.
That doubt has to be addressed.
It has to be addressed.
For us to move on.
Yes, and so I know the challenge is how do you address the doubt, but it has to be addressed. Otherwise we continue just putting a band-aid, the flagellation.
And we move on.
Yes.
Let me bring in Wasike into this as well. You know, we're talking about the Kenya that we want, looking at the Kenya that we have right now, what is it that you see happening today that is so unfortunate, that saddens you as somebody who has lived for a long time and you know the history of Kenya? What is it that is happening today that is soiling the efforts that our founding fathers really put in place to make this country achieve its dreams?
Fathers and mothers.
Yeah. They really toiled. Blood was shed. There are people who, it cost them their lives for us to be where we are today. But what is that one thing that, as somebody who has lived for a very long time, you see today and it just saddens you and you wish you had an opportunity to change?
Well, there are very many things that are taking place.
It's not just one.
Yes.
It's even worse.
Many things, as she just said. The vision of the leaders. What does one expect when he becomes an MCA? He has no car, he's looking for the black car. He has no shop, he has no whatever. He's looking, what can I benefit from whatever I'm doing? If it is making the road, what will be my percentage? So the leadership is being guided by selfish means. You know, they are not looking at the people. When we were public servants, we used to sign our letters, "Your servant," so and so. Okay. Nowadays, a civil servant is not a servant. He's a boss. Yeah. So there are very many things. For example, if I was, let us take, for example, you take a headmaster of a school, or not a headmaster of a school, but a school teacher, and you make him an accounting officer. And he has never been an accounting officer. He has no experience. All he's looking for is how can I benefit from this? And then he cannot even lead the people who are supposed to be the civil servants. So there is a lack of commitment, lack of training, because the school of government, they have devolutionized the government, but they have not devolutionized the school of government. So that every county should be having a training institute to train the civil servant. But here they are not trained.
They are just left to sail the waters.
You are a friend of so and so, the governor. Tomorrow you are the boss of finance.
Or you help me get this seat, then I'll find something.
So there are a lot of things which, and you see, when we speak, they say your days are gone. Things have changed. And when you are talking to somebody, he is very busy with this thing, what you call the phone. He's not looking at you.
Yeah, true.
You see? So there are a lot of things to be done. Even though we say we are modern, we have to think. You see, for example, institutions are not carrying out their mandate. What is killing our Kenyans is food. Okay? And before, we are now at the stage where America was some years back in the 60s, where they had to establish a very strong food and something institution, that nothing can go on the shelves which has not gone through that. But here we are eating food which we don't even understand. We knew very well that fish, if it is omena or it is which one, came from Lake Victoria or Lake Turkana. Nowadays you don't know where the fish comes from. It is an artificial one from China. And some of the fish, for example, which is being, and even chicken being produced here in the central province here, around Nairobi, are being fed on HIV tablets. so that they can grow fat quickly. So we are eating strange things.
Okay.
But the system, the systems are not working. You know, food is coming in. For example, you saw a lot of milk, which had been powdered milk, which had been brought in from Uganda. And before we knew it was powdered milk, we were buying it in Bungoma. We thought it was dairy milk. And this powdered milk, you don't know what it is from.
There was concern about the meat the other day.
Yes.
Everything.
Waters. You know, everything is becoming poisonous. So the question is, what is the leadership of the day doing about these issues?
Institutions have failed. And why have they failed? Leadership is failing.
How do we seal these loopholes?
Our
Mildred?
value system.
How do we seal them?
We have a big problem with our value system. So we detached from our value systems, and so everything goes. But I still go back to the fact that you have to be purposefully and deliberately set to lead and ask why you lead. If your value system is stronger, you will understand that leadership is really beyond you. It's about transforming those that you lead. And so unless we take that deep reflection and ask ourselves the real questions, the true questions, look at us. When the other day a leader, perceived leader, is taken to court because of corruption, and the people in his county come to say, even if he's a thief, he's our thief. He has stolen for us. And how we justify this kind of things, how we justify the mark and rot in our communities and societies. Nothing inspiring at all. Our value system is completely broken. And so it's not something that you can throw only to the top leadership. It starts from down. It starts from the house. It starts from our schools. It starts from how we interact beyond age gaps and age divisions and generations. It starts from how we work. We have to have open and honest conversations about our value systems. We see that many times it is disregarded. But we know that all of us come from a basis of culture, a basis of religion, a basis of how we work and live. But still at the top of the ladder is the one who's guiding the ship.
All right. The climax of the conversation I've been having with my guests as we bring this conversation to a close. And I like where we had gotten the climax of it and looking at where the loopholes are and how we seal them. I want us to get your final comments on the conversation we've been having. Just sort of something that will charge us into action to move forward as a country. And what is that rallying call that you both have for the nation this morning as we mourn, as we celebrate, as we learn, whichever direction any Kenyan will choose to go about the demise of the late Mzee Moi. I'd like to start with you, Mzee Abiud. What is your final remark for the nation this morning?
The final remark is that although I'm not very good in the Bible, is to quote Jeremiah. I don't know whether Jeremiah 6, where he said that, go back and see the roads, the old roads where they pass, and check, and if you see the ones which are good, follow them. Alisema rudi nyuma, uangalie zile barabara where they cross, the old ones and the new ones, and see if the old ones zile ziko mzuri, ufuate hizo. So the message is that although Mzee has passed on, and the government must continue being there, and for time immemorial, let us look backwards and see some of the good things of the past and see if we can make use of them, if they can benefit us. And what I'm trying to say is that don't write off everything that is a samani. Let us train our officers. Let us look who has been in the system. But let us not say, how far have you been in education?
Okay.
So that what I'm trying to say, and I'm repeating this one, let us not mix up the academic with administration. When you begin to have so many people who are supposed to be professors teaching, and they say they are professors of everything in the government, then you are in problems. I remember the new constitution was written by lawyers, and the lawyers made sure that most of the institutions are headed by lawyers. And until that is, they didn't want any experience, whether you have grown in it or not. If you are not a lawyer, you are not fit. And thus we make everything lawful. Let us review our approach. We may be modern, but not everything that is modern is good, because when you take the earphone and put in these modern telephones, there is always a flash there in red. Continuous use of this thing will affect your ears, but the modern people don't read them. I have been in a bus from Bungoma to here, and sitting with a young man with the earphones in the ears, we never talked up to Nairobi. You see? So this is dangerous, and it is becoming dangerous in everything.
Yeah.
May the Lord keep us.
Thank you so much, Mzee Wasike. And we need people like you in the society, and we need to listen to what people like you say. Really listen, because he has some very wise words there to just advise the young generation. And I also want you to share with us what your rallying call is, Mildred.
I think my parting shot is this. Many people look at leadership and they think I am not a leader because I'm not a politician. But this is what I want to say. That if you can encourage somebody to be better, if you can inspire somebody to do more, if you can motivate somebody to do a better job of what they're already doing, to be a better version of themselves, then you are a leader. You're a leader. If you can motivate somebody to be a better version of what they already are, then you are a leader. Now, leadership, like I said earlier, does not create more followers. It creates more leaders. And so I would urge that we reflect at this time, when we are bidding farewell to the former retired President Moi, as to whether in our leadership spaces, and it doesn't have to be political leadership, whatever space we occupy, whether we are creating more leaders or more followers to cheer us on. I want to urge that we take time to reflect on our legacies, because once your legacy is contested, then it is problematic. We are not asking that we be saints. We are just asking that in our pursuit to lead, to transform, to impact society in whatever that we do, we reflect on actions and why we do the things that we do. We are a strong and sovereign country. I feel hopeful about this country despite everything else. My strongest hope is in the younger generation, that in their sitting down and looking inwardly, they will understand that the fate of this country is actually in their hands. And in doing that, they will interrogate the kind of legacy they want to leave behind. That 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, they will look back and say, we are the generation that held the country together, that we did not let the country disintegrate. We are the generation that motivated and inspired young people to do better, to do more. We are the generation that didn't let our country die. And we have no choice but to ask the younger generation to really reflect, to quit pointing fingers, to quit lamenting and complaining. I know there's room for that. But then they should ask themselves, who are they motivating? Who are they leading? Who are they transforming? Who are they impacting? What kind of leaders are they creating? As opposed to how many followers do they have on Twitter or Facebook or on IG? That is not leadership. And so as we celebrate, as we lament, as we mourn, as we acknowledge the life of the retired former president, my parting shot is exactly that. what kind of leader are you?
What kind of leader are you? Thank you so much, both of you, ladies and gentlemen, for creating time for us this morning. What kind of a man was Moi? Opposition leader Raila Odinga has described Moi as a freedom fighter, humorous and cheerful. This is what he said yesterday when he went to view his body. Kapinguri, a member of parliament, Samuel Moroto, has hailed Moi for promoting national cohesion through his philosophy of peace, love and unity. Bahati, member of parliament, Kimani Ngunjiri, who served as the KANU chairperson in Nakuru County during Moi's era, says he learned a lot about the leadership of the late Mzee Moi. And Dr. Noah Wekesa, the chairperson of Strategic Food Reserve Board, says he once served under Moi as an assistant minister, and he termed the leadership style of Moi as one that was people-oriented. And I can go on and on about what leaders have been saying about the late Mzee Moi, but you can also share your message concerning what you remember about Mzee Moi. This conversation continues in the Swahili language. My colleague Timothy Kipnusu will be driving that conversation as we are handing over to him as we leave. Thank you so much for creating time for us. At KBC Channel 1 is where you can follow this conversation on social media. The hashtag is RIP Moi. Keep watching and enjoy the rest of your viewing.